All right, I see the director waving at me, and that probably means it's time to start the show, that we're live on the air. My name is Sean Boonstra. You are listening to Disclosure. This is talk radio from the Voice of Prophecy, a radio network that is now approaching its 90th birthday. In studio with me is someone else approaching her 90th birthday, my wife, Jean.
Well, I suppose I am approaching it. Every year I get closer and closer to my 90th birthday.
Everybody's approaching their 90th birthday, but you are over the halfway line.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'm almost to the halfway line of 100. Can you imagine?
You are.
Halfway to 100. That makes 50 the official fogey line. You become an old fogey
line
when you cross your 50th birthday. That's right. When you are 50, you get a little card in the mail that lets you hike your pants up to your armpits. It gives you permission and to yell at kids who are on your lawn, "Get off my lawn!"
Is that how that works? You have to wait for the official card?
Yeah, when you cross the fogey line, the government sends you a card.
Okay.
And if anybody, questions your right to yell at children, you can show the card. You can show the card. See, you have to get off my lawn.
So you're an official fogey after 50.
Well, I'm getting there. I don't like it when the neighborhood kids are on my lawn.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you are part of the club, maybe an honorary member already. What do you think?
Yeah, I've probably been there for a long time. And it's annoying how loud the music is. Everybody's music is way too loud. And music, in my humble opinion, not a piece of real music has been written since 1987.
Yeah, you definitely just dated yourself.
Yeah, 87 was the last year, but those aren't our topics today. We really actually have a topic. We have a topic that I have chosen. We're not just going to make up the whole show today. I didn't just wander in here with nothing to talk about.
Well, I hope not.
Or, Fogeyville. I could talk about Fogeyville for an hour, but that is not why our audience is listening.
No, I don't think so. So, Sean, what is our topic for Disclosure today?
Here's what I want to talk about, and it's kind of a catch-all topic, but it is, if you're listening, it's either October 2017 or it's pretty close to that date if you're getting it as a podcast. In the fall of 2017, October of 2017 is a huge, huge month for major anniversaries, things that actually relate to world Christendom, and I want to talk about some of those. I want to talk about Martin Luther in 1517, October 1517, nailed his theses to the door. The Bolshevik Revolution took place October of 1917, 100 years ago this month. And then a little strange happening that happened in Fatima, Portugal that we're going to dissect a little bit. And whether you're of a Catholic or a Protestant persuasion, I think you'll find that discussion a little bit interesting. We'll ask some of the questions that even the Vatican is asking about that. But those are that happened in October of 1917, the great big event in Fatima, Portugal. That was 100 years ago this month, too. So where to start? The first one, let's talk about the big one. It is now October 31st of 2017, will mark 500 years since Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg. Right, you heard that story before?
Oh, yeah, once or twice.
Yeah,
of course, and that's a crucial moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge deal for Western civilization and Christianity because even though the ideas behind the Reformation had been fomenting for a very long time, and I will always argue that Martin Luther didn't grow up in a vacuum. We had the Christian humanists like Erasmus. We had some other people setting the stage for this to happen. But it was evident that Martin Luther was the turning point in Europe where people got this idea that you could have a Christian church in Europe apart from the Church of Rome. And of course, that is the big turning point in Western Christianity. Outside the former Western Roman Empire, there have been lots of independent and Orthodox Christian movements. We had the Byzantine Church. There was a Celtic church outside the bounds of the Roman Empire. The Waldensians hiding up in the Alps. The Ethiopian Church down in North Africa. There were lots of churches outside of the Roman system since the very earliest days of Christianity. But in Western Christianity, sort of the environment we live in, Martin Luther, big deal, October 31st, 1517.
And of course, Sean, we've got a special coming out on some of those topics this month as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Don't we?
Some of those outside groups, right? A lot of people are going to be talking about the Reformation this year. I can think about a dozen conferences off the top of my head, special events that have been planned all over the country. And of course, the Voice of Prophecy wants to do something very special for the 500th anniversary of Luther too, because it was a game changer, no question about it. It is so important, this anniversary that The Vatican is commemorating it, which comes as a surprise to some people because, of course, Luther was protesting against, Rome in his day. But, there have been group events where the Pope, I believe Pope Francis, recently took a little trip to Lund, Sweden, and he took part in launching Lutheran celebrations of the 500th anniversary. So in some ways, there seems to be sort of a healing of the wound of this split in Christianity. And what some Vatican watchers are waiting for is some kind of announcement from the Pope just saying, hey, Catholics and Lutherans can now celebrate communion together.
Celebrating communion together. That would be quite a development if it happened, wouldn't it? Sean, of course, I think the Lutheran understanding of communion and the Catholic understanding, they're really very different because Rome teaches that the actual body and blood of Christ are physically present in the bread and wine, transubstantiation we call it, where the bread becomes the actual body of Christ. So very different understandings.
Yeah, absolutely. Martin Luther denied transubstantiation. It was one of the things that sort of launched that back in October of 1517. And he suggested something that he would have called consubstantiation, or
That's
his
right.
German term for it, which says that while the body of Christ is kind of present in the bread, it's really still bread. And now that's not a fair characterization. Please, if you're a Lutheran theologian or a Catholic theologian, I know it runs deeper than that.
Yeah.
Please don't write
We've
me a letter.
simplified it.
Yeah, I've simplified it. But the point is that Lutherans and Catholics do have a different understanding of what happens in the communion service, and there are still doctrinal watchdogs at the Vatican that would be none too happy if everybody just decided to ignore the difference and move forward with a joint communion service. But for the purposes of the 500th anniversary, I think it's interesting that Rome thinks Luther is important enough that they can't just let this year slide by and say nothing.
Well, the historical significance alone, I mean, you can't miss it.
No, you can't. And so let's come back to our event. What is the
Okay.
Voice of Prophecy going to do to celebrate Martin Luther? Right, everybody's celebrating, and we've got something that's a little bit different than what everybody else on the block might be offering. I like to think we're all a little bit different anyway, right? I'm not your usual radio host, and something's not quite right. But that's not what I really mean. We're calling this event A Pale Horse Rides. You'll find that terminology in Revelation chapter 6. And what we're going to do is look at the Reformation through the lens of Bible prophecy. I'm going to actually tie Martin Luther to the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I think people will find that interesting. Then we're going to go back in history and see how Martin Luther did not drop out of the sky and one day just start a new religious movement. It was centuries in the making. He was actually standing on the shoulders of thousands of, well, at least 1,000, not thousands of years. Christianity's 2,000 years old. But he's standing on the shoulders of 1,000 years of people who lived a different kind of Christianity just outside the borders of the Roman Empire, the former Roman Empire. We all know about the history inside the Roman Empire from the time of Charlemagne on, or at least we're supposed to know that from our history classes.
That's right.
But we've also discovered there were barbarian tribes who came to Christ outside of the context of Western Europe or the Western former Roman Empire. And that gave us an interesting case study.
Okay.
Because we know, as Christians, we can all admit now, things went wrong in the Dark Ages. We did things that were not right, not Christ-like. We were burning people at the stake. We were, we did things that were wrong. Let's just own it. So this gives us a case study. If there were Christians outside of the former Roman Empire, we could ask some questions. What would Christianity look like if we didn't have those compromises during the Dark Ages, those things that you and I did or our ancestors did? Although I wouldn't mind pinning the whole blame for the Dark Ages on you.
Oh, on me personally. Or
Somehow
my
you seem
ancestors?
responsible for it, and I demand that you pay reparations to my ancestors.
The Pepper Clan
The
is
Pepper Clan.
single-handedly responsible. Okay.
Yeah, single-handedly responsible for all of the atrocities of the Dark Ages. No, here's what we can do. We can look at this. What would Christianity look like if it grew up in a vacuum outside the political situation of medieval Europe? What would happen if you took a primitive tribe of barbarians and all they had was a copy of the Bible? What would that church look like? Would we actually have case studies? There are such tribes.
And you went on location to find the ruins of those tribes, didn't you?
Yeah, actually we did. And what we found was nothing short of jaw-dropping. This is an adventure. A Pale Horse Rides is the name of this series. It's an adventure that takes you to remote islands in the North Atlantic, to secret mountain villages in the Alps, to the wilds of Scotland, and even back into, well, there are some big surprises found in Italy itself. I went underneath a cathedral and found a huge surprise in the basement that would just blow you away. And so what we're going to do, we're going to present this information in an exclusive 3-part event that will help people understand what happened with Luther in 1517. And we're going to do it in a way that might well transform the whole way you look at modern Christianity.
Well, Sean, I really like that because a lot of people living in this day and age have sort of an uneasy feeling that something went wrong with Christianity at some point.
Like burning people at the stake.
Yeah, that definitely was wrong. But that it kind of went off the rails when it got mixed up with empires and politics.
Right.
And if I understand correctly, this 3-part series you were just talking about, of Pale Horse Rides, it's going to show why we have that uneasy feeling, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to open in auditoriums all across the nation. For sure the United States, probably in Canada you can find it.
Okay.
There'll be discussion groups afterwards so people can dig a little bit deeper, study guides that go with it. But yeah, we've got this uneasy feeling. A lot of people have been sensing in recent generations that maybe the Christianity we were raised with is not the purest reflection of New Testament Christianity. And you know, I keep hearing people saying, what if Christians were more Christ-like? That's really what we're exploring. There's been this urge in the 20th century to explore who is the authentic Jesus, who is the real Jesus, what is the real Christianity. And you see these specials on the History Channel that frankly go off base, saying, well, Jesus was nothing special, people made a god out of him when he wasn't. That's not what we're talking about. I want to be really clear. We are not going to challenge Orthodox Christian beliefs.
Okay,
the earliest church was absolutely crystal clear on the divinity of Christ. There's no question about it. And I'm talking Council of Nicaea. We've never been unclear on this. There were some rogue groups, the Arians and others. That's not what we're going to ask. We're going to ask about behavior. A lot of people are saying, but Christians don't behave like we would expect Jesus to behave. Did something go wrong somewhere historically? And so we're going to answer that question by looking at groups that lived outside of the political situation in Europe. And the event airs October 27. It opens. There's 3 short parts, some discussion groups and study guides available. You'll find all the information at palehorserides.com. And if that doesn't get you there, maybe it's just palehorserides.com.
Okay.
Palehorserides.com. What we want to demonstrate in this series, Gene, is that there were a lot of people who actually paved the way for Martin Luther. I think we mentioned that. Luther tried to drive our attention back to Scripture. So did Erasmus ahead of him, kept saying, should we just not take a look at what the apostles actually wrote? But Erasmus didn't quite launch the movement that, say, a Martin Luther did. And what we're going to look at is that Martin Luther was the culmination of 1,000 years, roughly, of tension in the Christian world.
Okay. He just didn't pop up in a vacuum. There was events and circumstances that led to this vital moment.
Right. And what this is actually a sequel to another series we did called Shadow Empire that showed the rise of Constantine and what happened when Christians began to mix politics with their Christianity and how things kind of went askew. And then we'll explore questions like, well, what can Christians do to reclaim a biblical Christianity, a real, authentic, Christ-centered Christianity, and look at issues that are taking place in the world today through the lens of what has taken place in the past. So, the first anniversary, October 31st, 1517, 500 years ago.
All right, and when we come back from the break, we'll talk about the second anniversary.
We do. There is something.
Okay.
I've got two more. But
all right.
I hear the music. Does that mean it's time for a break?
It does.
It is. Okay, so I'm going to go because I'm a fogey. I'm going to go take care of my fogey needs. And then as soon as this offer from the Voice of Prophecy has passed, we will be back with anniversary number 2. It is the year 2017. A lot of big things happened either 100 years ago or 500 years ago. We'll be right back. Creation. Evolution. Where did the world come from? Where did you come from? Were you created in an instant? Did you evolve from another animal or life species? These are issues that are discussed in classrooms, textbooks, and sometimes around your break table at work, when the conversation suddenly turns serious. These kinds of questions are answered in our free Discover Bible guides. These 26 beautifully illustrated guides cover all the major themes of the Bible, and they answer some of the hardest questions of life. You can get your free copy just for the asking by contacting me. Go to VOP.com and click on the tab that says Study. That's VOP.com, the tab that says Study, or phone me, 888-456-7933. That's 888-456-7933. 456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides, available just for the asking. Uh-oh, we are on the air. Gene, you gotta stop adjusting your sweater and stuff, because people are going to hear that on the radio.
They're going to hear the adjusting of
fixing
the
your
sweater.
hair, brushing your teeth. You should brush your teeth before you come into studio.
Yeah, I'm definitely not brushing my teeth in studio.
Yeah, well, where are you going to spit?
Exactly. That's why I'm not brushing my teeth in studio.
It is the year 2017, and today we're pausing to remember some of the things that happened in other 17 years throughout history. And we just talked about 1517. October of 1517 was when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg.
And of course, that was a landmark year, landmark time in history, religiously, politically.
Christianity changes forever.
Absolutely. So that's anniversary number 1, 500 years from the launch of the Protestant Reformation. So what is anniversary number 2?
Well, October seems to be a busy month. You notice the stock market usually collapses in October too. So it seems to be a tumultuous month. But October of 2017 also marks 100 years since the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia.
Of course.
Which didn't really start in, October, but it's the October Revolution. It really started in February of 1917. And those who were on the old Gregorian calendar, or still are, would probably say, oh, but the fall revolution was in November. But here in the West,
That's our October.
Yeah, it is our October 1917. We are 100 years from the Bolshevik Revolution. And of course, that revolution utterly shaped the entire 20th century. It set the stage for the world you and I grew up in.
Definitely.
And set the stage for the Cold War. Now, our kids don't remember the Cold War. They don't remember a world where we had to crawl under our desks to practice for the big nuclear strike from Russia. But that's the world we grew up in because of the Bolshevik Revolution.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. Did you actually have to crawl under your desk?
Yeah, I don't recall having to do that. What I recall more is having a friend who was so concerned about nuclear war that it affected her. It affected her studies. She had to go and talk to someone about it. I mean, this was real for those of us who grew up in that era. It really was.
And I don't think this next generation remembers it at all. It all started in October 1917. The October Revolution was the final overthrow of the old Tsarist system.
Right.
Back in February of 1917, Nicholas II, the Tsar, abdicated the throne, and Russia collapsed in the wake of that decision. Up to that point, it functioned pretty much like all the other European nations. It had a monarchy. It had aristocracy. It was an outgrowth of the old feudal system. But in February, that all falls apart, and there's a first revolution in St. Petersburg, which was called
Petrograd.
Petrograd, right?
Yeah.
You actually did a degree in this, didn't you?
Yeah, I of course my degree is in modern European history, and I loved particularly Russian history of this era.
Do you speak Russian?
No, not even a little bit.
Okay. Well, I think to really understand this, you should probably take some Russian lessons. I think that would be important.
I'll just fit that in my schedule.
Yeah, let's just do that. But
sure.
Hey, the government collapses after Nicholas the Tsar. There's a provisional government, the Duma, the imperial parliament. They form a provisional government. But that provisional government was still really mostly made up of upper tier people in society. It was still sort of the elites. And so there's this grassroots movement that forms, known as the Soviets. And that should ring a bell for everybody. The Soviets. And they're not happy about the Duma. They're not happy about the provisional government in Russia. And so by October, the Bolsheviks, which just means the people of the majority, they stage a second revolution. They overthrow the provisional government. The capital is moved away from Petrograd. It moves to Moscow, and we get the Soviet Union, the USSR.
Right.
That's the world we grew up with. And that goes on till about 1989, when the wall comes down in Germany and the old Soviet Union begins to crumble.
Yes.
Now, what the Soviet Union, here's why it matters to Christians. The Soviet Union, what it gave us from a Christian perspective, was an exceptionally powerful nation state that was officially atheist. that was their official policy. And what usually happens with collectivist, top-down, left-wing states, in order to control the economy, they had these 5-year planned economies, eventually you have to start controlling the people to make it fit this controlled economy. And to control the people, you eventually have to suppress or control independent thought. It's the only way a system like this can work. And of course, in those situations, the church almost always gets perceived as a threat to the government. That's the way it was in the Roman Empire, right? They were suspicious about anybody who spoke about a king other than their king or their Caesar. Back in the Roman Empire, Christians were talking about what they'd read in Daniel 7. There's a kingdom coming that will stand forever, replace all human kingdoms. And so the same was true in the Soviet Union. The state was supposed to be the object of your highest regard. It was what held everybody together. It was your destiny. But Christians always believe they have a higher king and there's a different kingdom coming, and that's perceived as a threat. So in these collectivist situations with a top-down sort of communist, socialist government, collectivist government, the church always ends up in trouble.
And you know, Sean, you and I grew up with all kinds of stories of Western Bible smugglers, Russian defectors, you know, people who were sneaking Christianity into Russia, into the USSR, and also the people themselves who were sneaking out of the country because of their deeply held Christian beliefs.
Yeah, those are the stories we grew up in. Those are the stories that got taught to children in church, in church school, and so on. As a matter of fact, I have a copy here on the desk. I wish it wasn't radio. I guess you can come and see it. But look what I have here. This is a very powerful book. This is a copy of a book called Your Bible and You. And that is it's a book of Christian Bible studies. But this is a very special copy. I hold this in great regard because this was actually typed in secret on a typewriter in the middle of the night in Bulgaria.
Okay.
This is hard for us to imagine, those of us who have access to Kindles, or we can just go to any library, we can read any book we want online. But the only way for Christian literature to get distributed in the former Soviet Union was for people to hand make copies. And so this is that Bible study book, Your Bible and You. And there were 7 pages made at a time. They would put carbon paper in between the copies. Now, if you're under the age of 30, you might want to Google carbon paper and typewriter so that you know what we're talking about.
Right.
But, you know, they would press one key at a time. They took this typewriter, surrounded it with pillows, typed in the middle of the night, closed all the windows so that it was quiet, and they would have to hammer one key at a time, very hard to get through 7 copies, just so that people would have this copy of Bible studies. And this one here that I have is about 530 typewritten pages.
Typed pages.
Yeah, now that the Soviet Union has collapsed, a lot of this stuff is sort of, now we can just, but this is a handmade.
This is history. I mean, this is real history.
That's
it's
right.
Incredible.
Go ahead.
Sean, too, our listeners, those of you who are listening, not watching, I just want you to know you can watch Disclosure. You can see this at disclosuradio.com.
Yeah, I'll hold it up for the cameras, and that way we'll capture it. But this is actually a handmade Bible study book, and a faithful Christian in Bulgaria sat up hammering it out. So here I am, Gene. I've got something like 4,000 books in my library, right? Our library.
Right.
And they're in piles of boxes down. So I've never, ever had to be afraid for my life because of any of those books that I own.
Yeah.
They're largely history, politics, theology. Here I am. I have a library card hanging on my keychain. I have access to Amazon.com. I can get any book I want in 10 seconds, and it's on my tablet. And I take that for granted. I think I've got 60, 70 Bibles in my study, all of these different versions. I've got every version I can get my hands on. And these people were willing to risk their lives to obtain a single copy of the Bible, even to have a fragment of the Bible in their possession. I've heard stories of people that had one page.
That's right. And they would tuck it away and hide it. I mean, it was an absolute treasure, just a little slip of paper with a verse on it. Sean, I know a lot of our listeners remember the financial austerity that took place in the Soviet Union, with Stalin even starving out millions of Ukrainians to get rid of them.
Right.
Many of us remember that. But as Christians, we need to remember also that religious liberty goes out of the window when we allow collectivist mentalities like this to take over.
Yeah, absolutely true. And now we have a generation that's grown up since 1990, and they don't really remember any of this. And I guess that's why I wanted to bring this up today. I've heard Christian young people say, but what was so wrong with socialism? It sounds so kind and so nice, and they think that older generations were exaggerating how bad it was in the
Right.
USSR and that these people actually had a wonderful life and it was really good. I hear that all the time. It drives me nuts. And I think the reason we hear so much of that is there are just so many Marxist influences these days in our public educational institutions. I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush, but more and more I hear voices that make Marxism sound like it's compassionate. Ooh, this is how you take care of the poor. When in reality, in every place that Marxism has been tried, every single place, it puts everybody into the poorhouse. That's how they achieve equality. Let's just take everything from everybody, and let's take away any independent thought. It takes away all religious liberty. And I think as Christians, that's what we need to pay attention to. When religion is seen as a competitor to the state, you start getting laws forbidding it. So my counsel to young people in particular, our kids' generation, is this. Yeah. If you are a Christian, I beg of you, be very, very slow to endorse collectivist agendas. Be very slow to believe that people will be more compassionate under these systems, that everybody gets be very, very slow. Do a little reading, do a little research. Be very slow to sign away your religious liberties because they're hard to get back once they're gone. Understand that once government gets big and the less free you are, it's hard to be very vigilant to protect the religious liberties of everybody else. Even people you disagree with, protect their right to believe what they want because your right is on the line too, right? We live in a world, we don't even allow dissent anymore.
No, right. Are there some things that they could read to develop a deeper understanding?
Let me tell you what we grew up on. And maybe you can still get these books. I went and checked the other day. If you don't remember the Cold War, you don't remember what the issue was, I think this is instructive for the future because the Bible does indicate, we're going to go through this again. If you read Revelation chapter 13, it tells us that Christians are going to go through a loss of liberty again. And so it wouldn't hurt to be a little bit schooled on this subject. So grab a couple of books. The Gulag Archipelago. Now, that's not bedtime reading.
No.
The Gulag Archipelago. Don't read that to your little children. It's pretty, it's by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, right?
Yeah,
Go get a
classic.
copy. Go get a copy and read it. Another one, it was just a favorite of mine as a kid, and you can still get it. It's called The Persecutor by Sergei Korsakov. He was a KGB enforcer who was required to go out and torment Christians in the former Soviet Union. But he eventually comes to faith in Christ and eventually has to leave. That one was significant for me because he ended up jumping off a ship off the west coast of British Columbia. I think he swam to a shore somewhere near...
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, somewhere near Prince Rupert when I was a kid. And that story was contemporary. Look, here's what I'm not saying. So don't write me letters saying, but life isn't perfect here in the West. No, of course it's not perfect.
Right.
But for people of faith, what goes on here is a lot better than what goes on in the rest of the world. Take a look at the collectivist mentality from Russia, North Korea, Hitler. Hitler was a socialist. It was a collectivist mentality. He was not. Yes, he was. He was a National Socialist. That's what Nazi stands for.
Socialist, right.
And so what happened to the Jewish community under that dispensation? Cuba. This one frustrates me ever since, Fidel Castro died. Everyone in the West, he was wonderful. This was wonderful for everybody. It wasn't wonderful for the Christians who had to leave at 2 a.m. and take rafts out of the country because they weren't allowed to practice their faith. I think I could go on, Gene, but I'm sure we've made the point. The USA, is it perfect? No, it's not. Is Britain perfect? Is Canada perfect? No. But we do have religious liberty, and we need to cling to it tenaciously. October 1917 was the beginning of a very, very dark chapter for modern Christianity. And so this month, in October of 2017, I am celebrating the fact that the old Soviet Union collapsed. And I'm thankful for the reprieve that we have right now. And that suggests maybe we won't always have a reprieve.
Very
Bible
true.
prophecy said it's going to come again. But for the meantime, I'm enjoying my liberty. It's 100 years since the Bolshevik Revolution. And so I hear the music. That mean I'm out of time?
It does.
I talked my way all the way to the break. Okay, we've got one more, though, right after the break, and we might want to take some time on it. But there's one more big anniversary coming up.
Yes.
After this, we'll be right back.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like Does My Life Really Matter to God? And A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter most to you in each of the 26 Discover Bible Guides. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
Welcome back to Disclosure. I am Jean Boonstra, and you're in the studio with myself and Sean Boonstra, the host of the program.
You almost didn't remember your name. I saw you hesitate when you were trying to remember your name.
No, that's not what
I'm not the
happened.
only fogey in the room. You couldn't remember your name. You looked at your Bible to see what was written inside the front cover.
No, I
Yeah,
didn't.
you
There
didn't
wasn't
remember.
enough time to look in my Bible. I remembered. Yeah, I'm pushing that fogey age limit, as you
My
call it,
wife
as well.
is halfway to 90.
More
More than halfway to 90.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I'm still younger than you, so I'll always have that.
You'll always be younger
I'll
than me
always
until
have
after
that.
I die. You know you do catch up because I don't think it counts. Like if I die at 80, let's say. No, let's give me more time than that. Let's say I die at 88 and you're 86. You'll turn 87, but nobody's going to celebrate my 89th birthday. You will catch up.
Well, I guess technically, yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So you might die older than me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Well,
weird.
that
Brought
is
to you by
weird.
Disclosure. No one else brings you thoughts like that.
Well, Sean, we do have a great topic that we've been talking about today. You know, it is the fall of 2017.
Yep.
Time does zip on by.
I thought we would have flying cars by now. I watched as a kid, and communicators like Star Trek, except that we
Right?
do have those.
Well, we do have
Look, my cell phone is so
watches
much
and-
better than anything Captain Kirk had.
No, very true.
They had those great big clunky things that they would pull out. Beam me up, right? Did you know that the line "Beam me up, Scotty" never once happened in the original Star Trek
That's
series?
right. I have heard that.
Yeah.
It's sort of one of those myths.
Yeah.
But the concept's there.
But it's 2017
Yes.
now, and I don't have a communicator. I can't get
you
beamed
have
anywhere.
a smartphone. I think you're doing okay. But no beaming, no teleportation. That
I've
would
tried.
be very handy, wouldn't it?
Yeah, who's going to be the first person to get in that teleporter?
I know. Yeah. Someone very brave.
Your mom. Are you listening, mother-in-law? We'll put you in the teleporter first.
Oh, Sean.
Please, if you found that insensitive, write your complaint letters to Jean Boonstra, Box 999, Loveland, Colorado.
And I'll put them right on your desk.
Oh,
Not
that's
a
fine.
problem.
Okay, we'll send them to your mom so she knows what I just did.
Well, Sean, this fall, October particularly, marks a couple of big anniversaries.
Yes.
First, of course, the one that we're hearing a lot of talk about and a lot of celebration of is the 500-year anniversary of the beginning of the Protestant Reformation.
Right, and if you go to palehorserides.com, you can find out the story that has
Pale Horse
not been
Rides.
told about Martin Luther.
That's right. And the background and all the events and interesting things that aren't common knowledge that led up to Luther nailing those 95 Theses to the door at
Right.
Wittenberg. Then we just...
And like Luther or hate Luther, whichever side of that you're on, if you're on the Catholic or the Protestant side, you can't deny change the world.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And another anniversary, 100-year anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, which of course changed, affected not only our childhoods, but changed the course of the 20th century.
Correct.
Brought in a dark era as far as religious liberty was concerned. And Sean, as we were talking about that, you made the comment that we now, today in 2017, we have a reprieve from that dark
we
era
do.
and religious liberty. Here, at least in the West, we're fairly free.
For now. For now.
So are you suggesting that it could happen again?
Yeah, absolutely. Bible
Yeah.
prophecy seems to indicate that there's going to be just read Revelation 13.
Mm-hmm.
Just read Revelation 13.
Yeah, Revelation 13. So that is 2 anniversaries. So now let's move on. What is the third?
Okay, third one's a little more obscure to some people, but this month also marks, or October 2017, if you're listening in November last month, marks 100 years since the miracle of the sun at Fatima, Portugal, October 13th, 1917.
Okay. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it was the concluding event in a 6-month ordeal that took place in Portugal in the context of World War I. What happened is that there were these 3 shepherd children by the names of Lucia, Jacinta, and Fernando, who started receiving visits from what they claimed was an angel in 1916. And the angel apparently was coming to prepare them for something big that would take place in 1917. So the story goes, it's raining outside, and these shepherd kids go play in a cave, and then an angel shows up and asks to pray with them. Now, before I go any further in the story, let me just point something out. I do believe in angels, and I do think angels communicate. They still intervene in human history. I've seen way too much not to believe that. But I do have to say this. We're going to approach the story of Fatima with a degree of caution. And I think no matter what Christian persuasion you are, you should be looking at this with a degree of caution. There are people in the Protestant world that look at it and ask some important questions, but there are also people in Rome, in the Vatican, that look at it and ask some important questions. And one of the important questions is this: if an angel shows up, it doesn't mean it necessarily comes from God. In his second letter to the Corinthians, Paul makes this important statement. He's talking about false teachers who suddenly show up in the church making a good impression, and then he says they present themselves as apostles of Christ in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 13. And he continues saying, and no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. So, just because something is angelic doesn't necessarily mean that it is from God. You still have to assess everything you see by the Word of God.
Yeah. Now, I know you've said this before on other shows, Sean, and I think it's right. The Bible repeatedly makes the point that miraculous does not necessarily equal heavenly, because most of the miracles are happening in all the wrong places over in the book of Revelation. It's the second beast who makes fire come down from heaven in Revelation 13, for example. And it's the spirits of demons working miracles in chapter 16. So even if an angel shows up, you still have to assess what's happening in light of the biblical data.
That's absolutely right. And I think at this point, we're going to look at more of the story before we come to any conclusions. But I will say this. There have been high-ranking people at the Vatican, or at least associated with the Vatican, who have all the right qualms about the way this story plays out. I'm not going to try and just diss the story or anything like that, but I think it's important for us to ask the right questions, no matter what your background. There are lots of good people, both, and I've said this already, but in both the Catholic and Protestant camps who have asked some important questions about what actually happened in 1917, and we need to ask those questions too, because the influence of this story goes on to shape a lot of the last half of the 20th century. It may be an unheard of event for a lot of people, but it is not insignificant. So we've got three children, Lucia, Jacinta, and Fernando, and in 1916, during World War I, they get 3 visits from an angel.
3 visits, okay.
Then, on May the 13th, 1917, do not forget that date, May 13th, 1917, there's a flash of lightning in the sky, even though it's a perfectly sunny day. And over a small tree, these 3 kids see the apparition of a woman who does not tell them who she is. Now, if you're of a Catholic background, you can probably guess who it is, or who it claims to be. It's widely believed, because of the subsequent messages that this apparition delivered, that this was an appearance by the Virgin Mary. And she asked these kids to come back to the same spot on the 13th of every month for the next 5 months, 6 visits in total. So
we start May 13th.
May 13th. Let's move forward. June 13, fast forward. She shows up again. This time she tells these 3 children that God wants the world to be devoted to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Now, if you're from a Protestant background, let me explain this. The Immaculate Heart is this concept that in order for Mary to be the mother of Jesus, she had to be born without original sin, and that Mary was in essence sinless in order to be good enough for the role of being the mother of Jesus. Now, interestingly, I just will point this out, and I'll admit I come from a Protestant perspective, but you can search the Bible from beginning to end. You won't find the Immaculate Conception anywhere, that Mary was born sinless, but it is a tradition that has come down through the centuries. It was really the product of church theologians rather than the apostles writing in the New Testament. So that's visit number 2. Visit number 3, July 13th, 1917. Mary comes back and shows these children a vision of people burning in hell. Which the children said, well, that's disturbing. That's literally, they spoke Portuguese, so they didn't say that's disturbing. But and of course, that would be disturbing, watching people flip and fry in the fires of hell. And then in July 13, on that date, we also get a mention of Russia for the very first time.
Oh, interesting. A mention of Russia. At this point, of course, they had already had their first revolution, and the October Revolution was just around the corner, July to October. And after that point, of course, Russia becomes an officially atheist state.
That's right. And what this apparition says is that God is waiting for the Bishop of Rome to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, or something to that effect. So there is reference to the turmoil that's going on in Russia at the time. It's not particularly remarkable that someone would point out Russia, because the world was watching by this point. So if this story is to be believed, you start to get this sense that there are major unseen spiritual forces at work in this story, and that there may be big spiritual influences working behind the scenes in some of the biggest developments of the 20th century. I'm not quite ready to weigh in yet on what those forces might be, but I think if you read these stories with an open Bible in your hand and a prayerful heart, it becomes pretty obvious what's going on. This matches a lot of this story, and we'll leave this for another day, but a lot of this story actually matches what the book of Revelation predicts for what would happen after the close of the Dark Ages, after, say, 1798. So, at this point, third visits happen, word's gotten out, and people are coming to watch the apparitions take place. I'm not sure if they actually see anything or if the kids are just saying, no, I'm not clear on, this is what I see. But there are thousands coming out to watch this.
Okay.
August
So this
August
would
of 1917, the 13th.
Fourth of the fifth?
Fourth visit,
Okay.
right? No, 4 of 6.
4 of 6, okay.
So the kids actually missed their appointment because for some reason, and I don't remember what it was, but the mayor keeps them hostage and he locks them up and he won't let them go for the appointment. But 18,000 people show up to go down to the tree, and some of them claim they saw something. I'm not sure what they saw. Okay, that's number 4. Visit number 5, September 1917. The apparition tells the children that something really big is going to happen in October. They're going to see a miracle to confirm everything they've been hearing. They're going to see apparitions of Jesus and Mary and Joseph in the sky. And by now, some people are saying there are 30,000 people turning out to watch this. And what's happening throughout these messages is that the apparition of Mary, she hasn't identified herself yet. She's essentially telling these children that the reason the world is experiencing chaos, remember this is World War I, is because the world has offended God. That's what she's saying. She tells the children to pray for peace, asks for the world to consecrate itself to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The children are told to pray the Rosary, and then they're told they're going to sacrifice their lives for the sake of helping sinners reconcile to God.
Wow.
So, number 6, October. This is the biggie, right?
Okay.
October 13th, 1917. 70,000 people show up now to see what's going to happen.
Wow.
Some estimates say, more than 100,000 people, but most of the data I've seen, it puts the crowd somewhere between 70, 75,000 people. It's a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a huge crowd.
Now, they all show up. Everybody gets to the location. It is pouring rain. It is miserable. It is cold. It is muddy. We know Lucia's mother is freaking out because they've been told they need to sacrifice their lives for the sake of... Right, she's worried about, was my daughter going to come home today if she shows up at the tree to see the visions at Fatima again?
Yeah.
It's understandable. You're a mom, right?
Yeah,
Wouldn't you
I would be very concerned.
Right. So the apparition appears again right on schedule, and she says a number of things. Number 1, I want a chapel built to my honor on this location. Number 2, I think that chapel's actually still there. I knew someone whose family worked at that chapel. Secondly, she says the war was going to end very soon. Soldiers are going to start coming home. And then thirdly, she says that people need to quit offending Jesus because they've offended him enough. So 3 points. The chapel, the war is going to end soon, and the world needs to be reconciled to God. And that's when the big event happens. Now, I hear the music, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to build a little cliffhanger on disclosure. What happens? What's the big deal? October 13th, 1917. The 3 children, the visions at Fatima. And I want you to pay attention to this offer from the Voice of Prophecy. We offer some of the world's best Bible study resources. So grab a pen and paper. You're going to want to take advantage of this offer and see what we've got going on down here. It'll enrich your life, draw you closer to God. When we come back, we'll continue with the visions at Fatima and some of the questions that scholars on both sides of Christianity, both Protestant and Catholic, have been asking about this in recent history.
Are you searching for answers to life's toughest questions? Like, where is God when we suffer? Can I find real happiness? Does my life really matter to God? Or is there any hope for our chaotic world? The Discover Bible Guides will help you find the answers that you're looking for. Visit us at BibleStudies.com or give us a call at 888-456-7933 for your free Discover Bible Guides. Study online on our secure website or have the free guides mailed right to your home. There is never a cost or obligation. The Discover Bible Guides are our free gift to you. Find answers in guides like A Second Chance at Life. You'll find answers to the things that matter the most to you. Visit BibleStudies.com and begin your journey today to discover answers to life's deepest questions.
And we are back. We are in the fourth quarter. The fourth quarter, like
Final
it's a
quarter.
The final quarter. If it was a football game, it would be the final quarter.
Yeah.
If it was a hockey game, it wouldn't even work. It doesn't even work, right? Because there's 3 periods in a hockey game.
That's right. No quarters
My
in a hockey
Canadian
game.
wife. My Canadian wife. We're talking about the vision at Fatima. We got all the way down to October 13th, 1917. And that's when the big event happens. According to the people who were there, Gene, I think somewhere over 70,000 people are gathered in this field now. And it's raining, right? But suddenly it happens. The big event happens. The clouds part. Mary shows up, or this vision of a woman shows up. And then according to the people who were there, suddenly these beams of light suddenly burst out of her hands. They point up into the sky, and the clouds disperse, and there's the sun.
Right.
Except there's something weird about the sun. You can look at it. Now, this past year we had an eclipse. Even when the sun was 95% covered here in Colorado, you still couldn't look at it with your bare eyes.
You'd still do eye damage.
But all those people said they could look straight at the sun. It was about the intensity of the moon. So they could look at it. And then it changes color. It spins in the sky. It dances all around. It's casting colors all over the place. And then it falls out of the sky. It plunges to the earth. And there are, to this day, photos of this event. People taking pictures of the suns in all these weird places in the sky. And everybody freaks out, like you would too.
It must have been terrifying.
Well, if the sun drops out of
Yeah.
the sky, I'm going to put that on my list of things to pay attention to.
Definitely.
And you could say this is mass hallucination, except 70,000 people aren't having a mass hallucination, and there are photos of this event. So somebody saw something. Something did happen.
Okay. So something happens, but of course the point is even if they did see something, that doesn't necessarily mean that it came from God, does it? We still have to do our homework. Sean, it reminds me of the verse in 1 John chapter 4, verse 1. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many prophets have gone out into the world.
False prophets.
Yeah,
false prophets. You skipped the
Sorry.
important word.
Skipped the
That's the
important word.
Gene Boonstra version of the Bible.
False prophets.
No,
Yeah.
that's right. We've got to make sure we're not falling for something. Look, and in the last days in particular, the Bible says, watch out. It's the spirits of demons working miracles and so on. And so let's talk about this. Could this have been from God? Yeah, we always have to say, yeah, God does speak to us and stuff. But there are some questions that bother me, and that's all I want to do with this. I just want to ask the questions and then have people think about this very carefully. And a few of these questions I know other people have asked, Vatican scholars, some of them have asked. I've come across their questions. But here's one. Here's my first question.
Okay.
If this apparition shows these children a vision of people burning in the fires of hell, here's my big objection, or my big question, really. There's this story in Matthew 13. Jesus tells this parable of a sower sowing seeds, and then an enemy sneaks into the field at night and sows, weeds, tares. It's the parable of the wheat and the tares. And when the field hands go to pull out the weeds, the landowner says, no, don't pull those out, because you might pull out the good plants in the process. And the whole thing, when Jesus explains it in Matthew chapter 13, says, let both grow into the harvest, and at the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, first gather the tares or the weeds and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn.
Right.
So he's saying, don't you go and judge who's saved and who's lost, who's right with God and who's not. That's my job. And the good and the wicked plants live together till the end of the world, till the second coming. It's a parable of last day events. And what Jesus is doing is telling us that the decisions about our eternal destiny don't actually go into effect until the very end of time. And in fact, when his disciples ask him to explain the parable, he says, therefore, this is Matthew 13, verse 40, therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of this age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend and those who practice lawlessness. So, when does the actual punishment? We have to look at this objectively and ask ourselves, did any sort of mythology creep into our belief system in the medieval period? The answer is clearly yes. I'll just say this. The Bible indicates that the wicked receive their justice, their punishment, after the second coming. So it raises my eyebrows a little bit if the apparition is showing these children people who are burning in hell. It just does.
Right.
Now, I suppose you could say, well, she's showing them the future. Okay, but there is another question. And this is the big red flag for me. There's a passage in the book of Ecclesiastes that makes it crystal clear that dead people do not have the ability to communicate with us. Period. Ecclesiastes 9 verse 6 says of the dead, their love, their hatred, their envy have now perished. Nevermore will they have a share in anything done under the sun. Job 7 verse 10 says the dead never return to their houses. Their place never know them again. So, and I know some Christians believe that, Mary was bodily taken to heaven, but they also believe that she died first.
Right.
So here's the question mark. It's just a question mark. I'd encourage people to do their homework. The oldest traditions, it's not scripture, but the oldest traditions have Mary getting a visit from Gabriel. Gabriel says, look, your time on earth has come to an end. Go back to Bethlehem. You're going to die. You find that in an old work from the 4th century called The Account of St. John the Theologian and the Falling Asleep of the Holy Mother of God. That is a long title. We would
That
never
is.
title. Yeah.
That is.
Now, it's not in the Bible. All
Right.
we really know from the Bible is, John 19:26. Jesus appoints John to be the guardian of
Take
Mary.
care of his mom.
We know he went to Asia Minor. She probably went to Asia Minor with him and probably died there. Mary died. And the whole tenor of the Bible, this thread runs all the way from Genesis to Revelation, says that the dead can't communicate with us. It doesn't work that way. And God strictly forbids communication with the dead. So it does raise a question mark. In the Bible, it's always an angel who comes to deliver messages to God's people or a living prophet every single time. And God forbids communication with the dead. So the idea that a dead Christian would come back and speak to us, at the very least, question it. At the very least, question it. I know there are Christians of every tradition listening, and this may be a part of your tradition. I don't mean any disrespect by this whatsoever, but ask questions, because even in Rome, people are asking questions about this event. And this event absolutely did shape a lot of the 20th century.
Well, how so?
Well, this is where it gets fascinating. 2 of those children are dead by 1920. You know what's going on in 1919?
Well, the flu epidemic.
The big
of
flu
course.
epidemic. So
Right.
2 of them are dead. Jacinta. Oh, it wasn't Spanish speaking. Oh, I'm butchering that. It's Portuguese, but it's... I see Ruben trying to correct me. It's Jacinta, I think. And Fernando, they're dead by February of 1920. So only
sad.
Lucia, or Lucia, survives.
Okay.
Now, apparently the 3 children had been given 3 secrets by the apparition. Here's where this plays into the 20th century.
Okay.
The first one was the vision of hell, not a secret. We all know what it was. The second was a call for devotion to the Immaculate Heart. That was the second secret of Fatima. But the third one is actually a secret. Nobody said what this apparition told the children. In 1941, Lucia started to write it down, but she stopped after one sentence, so she didn't finish the sentence. She said, "In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved." Then in 1944, she finally writes down the whole thing. In 1957, she sends a copy of what the third secret is to the Vatican with instructions, don't open it till 1960, because in 1960, it will be much, much clearer.
Well, and of course, 1960 is a big year for other things that are happening in the Vatican.
Well, yeah, absolutely. In 1960, they're all gearing up for the Second Vatican Council. And the
Right.
liturgy of the Catholic Church suddenly changes, and they start using the vernacular. In other words, they put the Mass in your own language. So there are a lot of people in Catholic circles who think that the third secret must have been a warning for the Catholic Church not to modernize and go down the Vatican II path. And we've seen a push recently in recent years to go back to the Latin Mass. I think it was Benedict XVI said to do it. Mel Gibson's a big fan of that, just by way of trivia and so on. But we really don't know what the secret was in that envelope. We know that before Pius XII became Pope, he warned there were dangerous changes coming to the Church. So it's understandable in light of that comment, some people thought the third secret would relate to Vatican II, but we don't really know.
Interesting.
Toward the end of 1959, John the 23rd apparently read what was in that envelope, and on February 8, 1960, he tells the Catholic world, "I'm not going to tell you." And so everybody's disappointed. A lot of people are geared up. 1965, Paul VI reads it. He says, "I'm not going to tell you."
Okay.
But then something happens.
Okay.
May the 13th. Remember that date?
Yes, that was when the visions first began.
That's
correct?
right.
1917.
May 13th, 1981. Who was Pope in 1981?
John Paul II.
That's
And
right.
wasn't that the day that he was shot?
He got shot
Yeah.
May 13th, 1981.
Right.
So he suddenly becomes very interested in the third secret of Fatima, and he asks if he can read it. And he obviously believes that it has something to do with him, because he takes one of the bullets, one that they found in his Jeep, and he goes to Fatima and he places it in Mary's crown in the statue at the shrine of Fatima and thanks her for saving his life. And because we do know that this apparition kept telling the children the Pope had to do something about Russia, this deepened John Paul II's desire to do something about global communism. Up to this point, he thought he would play the long game and wait out communism and slowly counter it and take it down.
Right.
But after the assassination attempt, he becomes very determined and he wants communism to fall. Was it inspired by the story of Fatima? I don't think there's any doubt, because we have lots of evidence to suggest that John Paul II is deeply fascinated by the visions at Fatima. And so by 1982, he's meeting with Ronald Reagan.
Who, of course, by coincidence, was also shot by a would-be
Exactly.
assassin the year before. And of course, Sean, we all know now that those two men worked closely together to help Lech Walesa and the Solidarity movement to stand up to the Soviets in Poland. And of course, that was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union.
Today, it's common knowledge that Reagan and John Paul II worked on pulling down global communism together. Right. And that's why I say that Fatima indirectly was one of the most influential events of the 20th century. Now, do I personally believe that that was from God? No, I don't. I'll just be that blunt about it. I'm not convinced. I have grave biblical reservations about it. But, and I don't mean that as disrespect to Christians who do believe it. That's not really my point. My point is that story, did it influence events in the 1980s and 1990s? There is no question about it.
Okay, things came out of that instance. So do we know today what that third secret was?
No, we absolutely don't. And honestly, from what I understand, Lucia actually had trouble remembering details in the events of what happened just in the first few weeks when she was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm a little suspicious that she managed to remember it decades later. I suppose that's possible. I'm also suspicious because Lucia really wasn't part of the church, and she was suddenly whisked away to a convent and kept hidden from the world for a long time.
Okay.
Now, in 2000, there was a version of the Third Secret circulating. It came out that talks about a soldier shooting a pope, but there are some Vatican officials who say, wait a minute. The original letter from Lucia that she wrote back in the 50s and wrote in the 40s, sent in the 50s, we know the priest who picked it up held it up to the light, and he saw a single page inside that envelope with, I don't know, maybe 25, 26 lines. I forget the number of lines. But the version that came out in June of 2000 was suddenly 4 pages long. It didn't match what the priest actually saw go out of Lucia's house. And so there's a great deal of suspicion that what came out wasn't the secret at all. Nobody really knows. Nothing ever really came out.
Wow. Well, I guess the real lesson for us is that the safest place to get our information about the Christian faith, it's straight from the pages of the Bible. The original inspired witnesses to events that surrounded the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Christ. Sean, does that bring us to the close of another episode? We have covered a lot of territory, haven't we?
Yeah, we covered Martin Luther.
3 big anniversaries, yes. Martin Luther's 500th, Bolshevik Revolution of October of 1917, and one that probably surprised people, 100-year anniversary of Fatima, and how that belief in an apparition really shaped history moving forward.
Right, and if we had time, we could go into Daniel 7, we could go into Revelation 13, and we could see how all of that might just tie into last day events, because the last day events actually describe miraculous manifestation. They describe spiritualistic trends that every Christian should be paying attention to in these last days. But there is one more October anniversary that we must not forget. This was really, really, really important. Something else.
Is it the one that I make a pumpkin pie for every year?
That is absolutely correct.
Oh, that would be your birthday.
That would be my birthday. My birthday is in October, and I just want to say that after all this time on the radio, our listeners never, ever send me a note or a card or anything like that. And see, so not only did Fatima turn 100, not only did the Bolshevik Revolution turn 100, and Martin Luther turned 500, I'm turning, we won't say how old.
Less than 500.
Less than 500. And I may not have changed the whole world like the Bolsheviks or... I haven't had that kind of an impact, but I'll say this. I've changed your world.
Yes, you have.
And here you are,
for
still
the better.
afflicted by that momentous occasion. My birth, October 28, 1960-something. That's all I'm going to say. 1960-something, because I don't want to get my fogey card any sooner. No, I don't want to get my early fogey card. I don't qualify quite yet. Thank you for listening to Disclosure. We're always glad when you join us. Visit us online. That website can be found through thevoiceofprophecy.com, and we'll be back next time.